Two words on emotional abuse. It's all about power and control.
He didn't want to know that his property was with anybody else because he believed he owned me.
People need to understand that this is an epidemic.
I think we're seeing more emotional abuse right now than ever before.
Armed domestic violence offenders are the most dangerous offenders in our communities.
With his temper, I was always thinking I could manage it. It was like manageable. It's that conditioning. It really is.
This has been part of domestic violence for generations. It's historic that the law is finally catching up.
The Spotlight brought to you by Beacon Plumbing.
Hello and welcome to The Spotlight. I'm David Rose. Earlier this year, we introduced you to a woman named Shauna. She was hiding in a domestic violence and abuse shelter at the time after detectives say her ex-boyfriend raped her after he escaped a federal prison. Shauna bravely shared her story of abuse, control, and threats to her life and to her children's lives while the attacker was on the run.
I was more scared for my life. I would have done anything he wanted me to do just to stay alive.
You were so brave to talk about this. Why are you willing to talk publicly about something so horrific? Why do you feel
because I don't
motivated?
want this to happen to somebody else. And I believe that this isn't the first time he's put hands on a woman or hurt a woman. He was way too comfortable with the way he treated me. And it just came so naturally.
The escaped felon was ultimately captured in Nevada. But as we watched reaction flow in online to Shauna's story, we noticed a disturbing trend: victim blaming. When we look back at the media's role in reporting on domestic violence, we often only discuss the topics on the news when it's too late. A survivor's life has been ripped apart, or the abuser has murdered someone. But so much happens in a relationship before that first act of violence. So we are shining a spotlight on an escalating domestic violence crisis, answering the question so many ask: why do they stay? It boils down to a simple name for a very complex topic: emotional abuse. So what is emotional abuse? We asked experts, advocates, and survivors. Join us as we dive inside the mind of the abuser.
With his temper, I was always thinking I could manage it. It was like manageable. I'm college educated and I'm a professional woman. To put up airs outside and let everybody think that you're this beautiful, like, accomplished middle-class American family, and behind closed doors a lot other things are going on.
Two words on emotional abuse. It's all about power and control.
He did not want to let go because he wanted to be in control.
The abuser uses sometimes some pretty complex skills to manipulate the behavior or to manipulate feelings of another person in order for them to have power and control.
Growing up, you hear these stories about like abuse, and like you see these Lifetime movies, and you're like, oh, if that ever happens to me, I'm gonna, but you don't realize you're in it and how far you're in it. You can't just leave. It's not that simple. There's so many layers to it.
We almost treat it, well, that's just the way he or she is. We minimize it and we deny really what it's doing.
It's a really debilitating situation to be in, because you're loving this person who is hurting you, and it doesn't make sense because your heart and head are completely divided. There's so much fear.
Emotional abuse are two words: cunning and baffling. It's very clear that when there's physical or domestic violence, sometimes you can actually see it. Emotional abuse, it leaves scars, but they're invisible.
We see in legal cases all the time, well, where's your proof that so-and-so did X, Y, or Z? So many of the questions around that we ask of survivors are kind of illustrate culturally how little we understand, why didn't you leave, or why didn't you tell someone? We are asking the wrong questions, because it's not why did you stay, it's why did the abuser abuse in the first place? That's the question.
There's kind of mild emotional abuse, but over time, mild emotional abuse or name calling, wearing you down, has the same effect over time. It all leads you down the same path. There is a certain amount of that ultimately can and does turn violent.
One of the most common things we see kind of across the board from folks who are experiencing all different types of abuse is a sense of isolation, that the abuser is kind of the be-all, end-all, they control the dynamic of the relationship.
One of the things he always would tell me would be, if you leave me, you're going to fail at everything. Your life's going to suck. You're not going to be accomplished. And that's like, after hearing it for a while, it kind of sinks in.
So if you feel you're in a relationship where you're feeling constantly controlled, you're feeling manipulated, those are some warning signs.
You become so confused and you lose yourself. I lost myself so much. I had no idea like who I was, and it took me several years before I could like get a sense of self back. But you know, being able to tell your story, that is like powerful for a survivor. I ran away from my voice for a while, and I'm getting it now.
Until now, emotional and domestic abuse have been considered vastly different issues by law enforcement in Washington state, by the courts, and therefore by the general public. But on July 1st of this year, that all changed. Legislators in Olympia moved to redefine domestic violence, recognizing the extreme effects that non-physical abuse can still have on someone. The new legislation is opening doors for domestic violence law experts, like Professor Deirdre Bowen. She hopes the change makes navigating the complex legal arena of DV law a bit more inclusive. For a little more than 2 months, a few new paragraphs in Washington's Book of Laws have quietly changed the game when it comes to protecting survivors of domestic violence.
So the bill, in a word, is huge in that it changes the definition of what domestic violence means in Washington state.
For decades, if someone was unable to prove physical harm, to show bruises or evidence of an assault, the law could do very little. That's no longer the case.
The relief that you don't have to turn people away and say, I'm sorry, what you're experiencing is truly awful, and you and I both know it's abuse, but under the law, I cannot assist you in getting any protection.
So what changed? In layman's terms, it gives emotional abuse a legal name and tells survivors what you are experiencing is domestic violence.
Before, there's a very narrow definition for domestic violence. It literally referred to a threat of fear for physical harm and nothing else. But now this new bill is introducing a new concept called coercive control.
Coercive control is the legal way to sum up the vast majority of emotional abuse. House Bill 1901 defines it as, quote, behavior used to cause another to suffer physical, emotional, or psychological harm, and in purpose or effect, interferes with a person's free will and personal liberty. So now survivors can cite coercive control when filing for a protection order.
This is important even in an emotional abuse case, because what might start as emotional abuse doesn't end there, and it can escalate very quickly. Those people now are entitled to those same protection orders.
The bill squeaked by in the state house, passing 57-40 back in March. But by April 1st, it was on the governor's desk. House Bill 1901 dives into different examples of what coercive control can look like. Intimidation, threatening to hurt something or someone special to the survivor, cyberbullying, distributing intimate images, otherwise known as revenge porn, driving dangerously on purpose, controlling a partner's career or finances, outing a person's sexual orientation or gender identity, and the list goes on. Individually, these may seem highly specific or even random things to include in a piece of legislation. But in the context of an emotionally abusive relationship, they are all ways an abuser seeks power and control.
The common question in the civil arena is, well, why doesn't she just leave? And once we broaden this definition to say, here's all the ways in which an abuser can never touch you, but really destroy your life and limit your free will, it helps people understand how difficult it is to leave.
Professor Bowen says on average, people attempt to leave an abusive relationship 7 times before they're able to get to safety. And the pandemic made that even more difficult.
So during COVID, for example, when we had a massive uptick in domestic violence because people were living with their abusers with no ability to escape, we saw not just that there was this uptick of the abuse, but in the types of abuse.
According to the American Journal of Emergency Medicine, calls to the National Domestic Violence Hotline reached an all-time high during the pandemic. The disturbing spike earning the name shadow pandemic as domestic violence cases rose from 25 to 33% globally between 2020 and 2021.
And in every single one of those cases, and I would bet that we probably have 75 to 80% of cases that we had to say, we're so sorry that what you're describing in your home during the pandemic is abuse, but it doesn't meet the legal definition.
So now under House Bill 1901, when someone is arrested for domestic violence, a protection order like this one, based on coercive control, can be taken into consideration in the criminal case. Professor Bowen says the impact of this new, broader law goes further than just a deeper understanding of abuse. It creates action.
Under the new definition, if you are convicted of a domestic violence misdemeanor, for example, which is the less serious crime, you will be banned from being able to purchase a firearm in Washington state.
It has the potential to save lives.
The most dangerous time for a survivor is the time that they decide to take action and leave. And that's where we start to see the largest number of domestic violence homicides occurring by firearm.
Still ahead, guns in the hands of abusers. Professor Bowen pointed out just how dangerous that can be and how the new law makes it easier to take those firearms away. So we wanted to see the law in action. We're taking you inside the operation that does exactly that.
A firearm in the home where there is domestic violence increases the risk of homicide by 500%.
Next, how a King County unit is changing the game for survivors. As you are about to see, the numbers prove it. Armed domestic violence abusers are among the most dangerous offenders in our state. And experts say getting guns out of their hands is the fastest way to save lives. King County has one of the most unique units in the nation. Their goal? To lawfully remove guns from domestic violence situations. The Spotlight's Matt Markovich takes us inside the effort to show us how the unit is helping survivors.
Police respond to one of the most dangerous and unpredictable calls they'll ever face: domestic violence involving a gun. This one in Tacoma ended horribly. The suspect shot by police.
It's a tragic story. Somebody just got their life taken away over domestic violence.
The stats are eye-opening.
A firearm in the home where there is domestic violence increases the risk of homicide by 500%.
Sandra Shanahan is the project director of one of the most unique domestic violence units in the country, the Regional Domestic Violence Firearms Enforcement Unit, inside the King County Prosecutor's Office.
Our whole purpose for existence is to intervene to lawfully remove firearms when the court has said you should not have them right now.
This is the Weapons Surrender Compliance Calendar.
And currently, it's King County Superior Court Judge Sean O'Donnell's job to make sure as best he can those guns have been given up.
By my count, there, I believe, were 9 surrendered firearms. So if you are subject to an order to surrender weapons, you got to come in and show me that you don't have any guns or dangerous weapons in your possession.
Every Thursday, he calls people who've been ordered to surrender their gun.
Sold it to a friend of a friend.
Today, there's 80 calls on his calendar.
Your testimony to me this morning that you don't have it in your car and it's not on your person?
No, it was not in my car. It was not on my person. It was on a top shelf.
Like this man who claims a handgun registered to him was stolen.
Took it out of the safe because I had it on my person earlier that day, and I put it on the shelf, and after that it's been gone.
I am going to enter a non-compliance finding, and the legislature has essentially turbocharged this effort to make sure that someone who is the subject of a protection order doesn't have any guns.
Washington State just simplified ways victims of domestic violence can get a protection order.
It's sort of a legal force field. If you want a protection order, it doesn't matter how you describe it, the courts have to consider that protection order. You're not going to get jammed up because you didn't use the right form. We as judges then have to accept that information and decide whether we're going to issue the protection order.
And that's when the Domestic Violence Firearm Enforcement Unit comes in.
So if somebody's experiencing domestic violence or stalking or sexual assault, they can come to the court or they can file online for any of a number of different types of civil protection orders.
The unit assists the victims, works with the courts and law enforcement to get the guns out of the hands of a potential abuser. Timing is critical.
When a victim of domestic violence leaves, that is the most dangerous period of time, and that's when a lot of the lethal violence occurs.
If a judge grants a firearms removal, that removal must be done immediately. Any police agency must accept the firearm, box it up, and catalog it for storage, and issue a receipt to prove to judges like O'Donnell they've done so. He uses background checks and purchase information to make informed decisions.
A Glock 10mm, a 12-gauge Dickinson shotgun, and an AR-15. The new law says it doesn't matter what kind of protection order, the order to surrender is going to accompany it.
It's all in an effort to avoid another tragic death.
If you see somebody with a pistol and that's angry or enraged, I would guess that anything's liable to happen. So you really can't fault the police for nothing, really.
Matt, if somebody's watching the broadcast right now and they're on the fence, they think maybe they need a protection order. Specifically, how do they go about doing that? Do they call 911?
No, you would probably start with your local prosecutor, your county prosecutor. In the big counties, they have units that allow this to happen. In the smaller counties, they still want to be heard. You may want to call the local law enforcement in a smaller county. But what's happened now, it's really easy. You can go online and get the forms and do it yourself and then file with the court, ex parte. You can contact that county prosecutor and you can call local law enforcement. They've made it really easy. There's no need to go out and find your own defense attorney and start that process.
What happens if a protection order is issued and the detectives go to the home and the person will not give up their guns?
Believe it or not, I'm being told that's a rare situation right now. Most people are cooperating, and it's how the police department that's going out there and getting the guns handles it. They do what's known as a warm handshake. They don't make a big SWAT presence and say, hey, we're here to get you the guns, and be confrontational. They knock at the door. It has to be done in person, and they'll give you a gun case. They'll give them a gun case, and they put their weapons in there, and maybe even come back another day. If that doesn't work, though, they will get a search warrant and then go into the house, and that's when you would see a large police presence. But I'm told by Judge O'Donnell that's a rarity in this situation.
But what about a legal gun owner accused of domestic violence who says, I'm a legal gun owner, you can't take my guns away from me? What recourse do they have?
Well, even if they haven't committed a crime, and as you know, if they're a felon, they shouldn't have had a gun to begin with. But if they haven't even committed a crime, they're completely clean, they still have to give up their guns when a judge orders that, despite the Second Amendment argument. They do have 14 days to show up in front of that same judge who gave the order to have their weapons surrendered and then plead their case there. But it does come down, the way the laws have been written across the country, that if a judge orders them to give up their guns, despite whether or not they've committed a crime, they're going to have to do so.
All right, it's a cutting-edge new program. We'll see if it works well. Thanks, Matt.
It's just so much easier, more cost-effective, and more humane to keep them with the people who love them.
Leaving an abusive relationship can be incredibly dangerous, especially if you're not leaving alone. Up next, the resources that pet owners need to stay safe. For many of us, our pets are one of the most precious parts of our lives. And for those trapped in an unhealthy or abusive relationship, they may be the reason someone stays despite the consequences. So, with few shelter options available for pet owners, we looked in a different direction and found a local program who is giving the pets and their humans a safer way to get out. For Seattle Humane, it's more than a mission statement.
A big part of our work here at Seattle Humane, especially over the last several years, has been trying to keep people and their pets together.
It's saving lives.
We've had several cases of domestic violence where a person did need to leave a violent situation and find temporary housing for their pet.
In 2020, the organization launched a program called Supporting Pet Owners in Transition, or SPOT. The temporary foster program provides a crucial need, safe housing for those who need it most.
We do hear from them that that is a big sticking point for them in why they end up staying for so long.
In Washington State, more than 60% of households have a pet. With 1 in 8 Washingtonians experiencing some sort of domestic violence, many pets are often caught in the crosshairs.
They're not focusing on themselves, they're focusing on their pets or their children, and they're really putting that off.
And the numbers back that up. According to the Urban Resource Institute, the vast majority of people in an abusive relationship say they won't seek shelter if they can't bring their pet. With only around 250 shelters nationwide allowing pets, that means many people are staying put despite the risk to themselves. Around 50% fear their abusive partner will harm or kill their pet. Almost 40% have already had threats made. And just under 30% have already had a pet fall victim to their abuser. So how does SPOT help?
So what we do with SPOT is we connect these people and their pets with a foster home that they are able to stay in for about 3 months. So the pet's there, the person is working on whatever they need to get in order.
And when ready, the pet can be brought to their new safe home and reunited with their owner. And the program is discreet.
We definitely make the process easy. We're very much concerned about respecting people's privacy. We do our best to make sure that SPOT pets are not featured in anything that we put out there unless we have permission.
But the resources don't end with SPOT. The Safe Haven Mapping Project shows which local housing options will welcome you, furry friend in tow. But getting out can be the most difficult part. Experts say have a go bag ready. It should include proof of ownership, vet documents, and any medicine the pet may need. Once at a new place, find a new vet and try not to let the pet outside by itself. And most importantly, if you can, don't walk your pet alone. Finally, remember that resources like SPOT are out there. Since the free program started in 2020, the number of fosters ready to take in pets has increased 7-fold. And this year, SPOT has already helped almost 60 pets stay with their families.
It's just so much easier, more cost-effective, and more humane to keep them with the people who love them.
Another thing to note, in 2009, Washington State amended the provision for domestic abuse protection orders to include pets. Remember, the definition of domestic abuse here now includes emotional abuse. That means anyone seeking a protection order in this state can be granted exclusive custody or control of any pet in their care. This protects the person from anyone trying to threaten or take that pet away, or even coming near that pet. As for how you can help, if you're not able to become a foster parent, you can donate directly to the SPOT program on Seattle Humane's website. We also have a link on our website for easy access to the SPOT program.
Best case scenario, you get banana bread, and worst case scenario, you're there for somebody when they really need you.
Making a difference can be as easy as meeting your neighbor. After the break, how a local effort is going into our schools and our communities with the belief that ending domestic violence is everyone's responsibility. Earlier in this episode, a local advocate helped us define emotional abuse. She works with a local organization called New Beginnings, dedicated to ending domestic violence in Washington. But beyond working with survivors, the organization is also involved in active prevention, starting with our local youth. Neba Zaidi is the Community Engagement Manager for New Beginnings, and their work centers around educating the public on what is and isn't a healthy relationship. And much of the work is happening in our local schools. Advocates say 1 in 3 teens report some sort of abuse in their romantic relationships. New Beginnings is providing the tools to change that statistic.
Prevention is never too early. Because from the moment we're born to the end of our lives, we have relationships, whether they're friends, family, romantic relationships. We see that the relationships that young people are in, even in their family lives, often set the stage for their later romantic lives, because it really sets up the healthy foundation skills for teens to say no, because oftentimes the red flags do get pushed with teens because they're not sure about their boundaries.
New Beginnings partners with local schools to run workshops for teens, and Neba tells us the demand is only growing. In some cases, students are even continuing their work after the workshop is over, creating groups to push for administrative change in their school's response to sexual assault. Beyond the school grounds, though, the work extends to the public. New Beginnings believes ending domestic violence is a community-wide endeavor.
Getting educated just to change yourself and your mentality is one of the best things I can ask someone to do. Making sure that your neighbor can feel comfortable coming over to your house should, something erupt.
As for seeking help for yourself, 988 is the new National Crisis Helpline. But New Beginnings has their domestic violence Hope Line, which is manned 24 hours a day with local people ready to help you understand anything happening in your own relationship. Even if violence isn't a factor, they'll pair you with resources right here at home. It's important to remember that you are not alone. Help is out there 24/7. That's all the time we have on the Spotlight. Until next time, be smart and stay safe.